Good evening from the second floor of the Duncan Student Center here at the University of Notre Dame. I'm Sam Coffman of Notre Dame Television. We are so excited to collaborate with BridgeND to bring this debate to the student body during this important election season. The crowd is down in Midfield Commons, but up here in this studio, I'd like to welcome you to the 2022 midterm debate sponsored by BridgeND.
I'm Patrick Condon, Vice President of BridgeND. BridgeND is a multi-partisan political club committed to bridging the partisan divide through respectful and productive discourse. If you're interested in civil discussion of important issues or exposure to new perspectives, we welcome you to get involved. Tonight, we are thrilled to have representatives from Notre Dame's college Democrats and college Republicans ready to debate some of the most pressing issues facing America during this year's midterm election cycle. We invite you, the audience, to thoughtfully engage with the arguments presented by these representatives. Criticize, find areas of agreement, and clarify your own political philosophy. Tonight's debate is intended to enhance all viewers' political understanding through the type of discourse that is too scarce today. BridgeND is sponsoring tonight's debate with NDTV, NDVotes, Student Government, College Democrats, and College Republicans. The rules for tonight's debate are as follows.
The questions were prepared by BridgeND's board and edited by Patrick and I. They were shared in advance with the candidates earlier this week. To start, both candidates will have 2 minutes, uninterrupted, to give an opening statement. Then we will move to the questions. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to answer our questions and then 60 seconds to rebut. 60 seconds to answer the question, 30 seconds to rebut. Along the way, Patrick and I can step in to follow up or bring back the focus of the debate. At the end of the night, each candidate will have 2 minutes to make a closing statement before we sign off. And throughout the night, you have the opportunity to ask questions as well.
On the screen should be a QR code which will take you to a Google form for questions that you, the viewers, are interested in hearing discussed. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the debate, as we hope to ask several audience questions toward the end of the night's debate.
We now want to welcome our candidates to the platform. Representing the College Republicans is Shri Thakur. Shri Thakur is a freshman at the University of Notre Dame studying international economics with a potential minor in constitutional studies. He is from Montgomery, New Jersey, and plans to attend law school after college. Welcome, Shri. We are very glad to see a freshman joining in, so welcome. And representing the College Democrats is Blake Ziegler. Blake Ziegler is a senior at the University of Notre Dame studying political science and philosophy with a minor in constitutional studies. He is from New Orleans, Louisiana, and plans to attend graduate and law school after college. Additionally, Blake is a columnist for The Observer. I wish you both the best of luck. Good luck to both of you. Take a breath. You've got this. But since the control of the presidential administration and the House and the Senate are with the Democratic Party, Blake will be starting off with his opening statement. So Blake, 2 minutes, uninterrupted, will go to you.
Good evening. I want to thank tonight's sponsors for co-hosting tonight's debate, as well as to College Republicans for participating. However, I want to note that this stage does not represent America. There are groups here that are affected by issues disproportionately that we'll be talking about tonight, and more effort must be made to elevate diverse voices on these discussions. Our country needs qualified, responsible, and visionary leadership as we face the issues today. And I'm here to tell you tonight that's the Democratic Party. Over the last 2 years, the Democratic Party has led one of the most productive legislative sessions in recent history. Whether it is the Inflation Reduction Act, which reduced prescription drug costs, reduced the federal deficit, instituted a historic response to climate change, or made corporations pay their fair share in taxes, we have accomplished much. The CHIPS Act has strengthened our economy, it has increased our national security, and it has strengthened our scientific innovation. And then on top of all of that, there are other legislation, such as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which led to a monumental investment in our infrastructure that will bring us into the 21st century. The Democratic Party produces results. The Republican Party, however, cannot tell you what they stand for because they don't know it themselves. The problem with the GOP is that they are struggling to balance two camps, one that wants full Trumpism and another that wants Trumpism without the Trump. The problem is simple. They don't know what that means. Fortunately, I can tell you, what you'll see tonight is a Republican Party defined by bad policies, an inability to govern, and toleration of practices that threaten our democracy. The question for tonight's debate is which party is better fit to serve our country. At best, Republicans will stonewall Biden. At worst, they'll threaten the foundations of our democracy. Vote Democrat for a better America for all and to continue the monumental progress that we've achieved over the last 2 years.
Thank you, Blake, for your opening statement. Next, Shri, we'll go to you for your 2-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Patrick. An invasion on our southern border. Families coping with stagnant wages and the worst inflation in 40 years. Children being chemically castrated and genitally mutilated by the pharma industry. Tonight, this nation stands at a crossroads. The Democrats have spent the last few years, and really the last few decades, waging a war on the American way of life and the institutions that once sustained it. They locked down your small business while allowing Amazon and Walmart to keep their doors open. They put the middle class on its knees with decades of outsourcing and unrestricted immigration. They shut down our kids' schools, and when they went back, it was to learn about drag queens or how white people are evil. Many of them live in gated communities, but expect you to shut up and deal with not being able to safely walk around your neighborhood because of their crime policies. They murdered 63 million unborn babies, distorted the family unit, and persecuted Christians who wouldn't come along. A vote for the Republican Party is a vote for the civic restoration of our nation. We will restore this country's national identity by securing the border and reforming the immigration system to put Americans first. We will restore our working class by getting spending under control, investing in our industrial base, and rebuilding our energy independence. We will restore the family by expanding marriage benefits and crushing cultural influences like transgenderism and abortion that debase our civic commitments to each other and to our communities. A vote for the GOP is a vote to reorder our nation to the common good and ultimately the highest one. Thank you.
Thank you both for sharing your opening thoughts. Blake, the first question goes to you. With the country facing economic uncertainty, the economy will be among the most important issues for voters this November. Let's begin our debate with the economy and talk about something timely here on Notre Dame's campus. This year, Notre Dame set the minimum wage to $15 for all student employees. Currently, the national minimum wage is $7.25. Do you support Notre Dame's decision to increase the minimum wage on campus? And should a $15 minimum wage be implemented on a national level?
Well, let me start off by saying that our student workers have our own CDEMS member, Edward Brunacardi, and his team to thank for the minimum wage increase. And that shows college Democrats actually cares about the community rather than college Republicans. But let me speak about this further. The minimum wage has not increased since 2009 and has lost 26% of its value since then. Americans at the lowest levels and in the middle class are struggling to put food on the table and to provide basic necessities. Action must be taken. Democrats have introduced legislation at the federal level and the state level to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. The Republican Party can't say that, but they can say that they voted against it. Every research has put out the benefits of implementing a higher minimum wage, whether it's raising millions out of poverty, giving higher wages to even more millions of Americans, or providing a better way of life for all people. We have to respect the dignity of all of our workers, and the only way to do that is by implementing a higher minimum wage.
Thank you, Blake. Shri, now to you for your response.
Thank you. Do I support Notre Dame raising the minimum wage? Of course I do. Notre Dame is a private organization with a $20 billion endowment and the financial ability to pay that amount to its workers. You know who can't pay it though? Small businesses who you locked down for 2 years and are now operating on low profit margins and at best would have to lay people off and at worst would shut down entirely. A federal minimum wage is actually a policy Wall Street has advocated for years because they know it will crush their competition. Not to mention the illogical...
Thank you, Shri.
Oh, it does? Isn't it a minute?
Yep.
Yeah.
You got your minute?
You got your minute.
So let's go back to Blake for the rebuttal.
I want to point out something that goes back to the Republicans' opening statement, and that was all of their dangerous rhetoric about immigration. They'll say that immigration is bad, but then they'll say that they oppose a higher minimum wage. Those are two opposite ideas, because the issue is if you're against higher immigration, all that's going to do is put more pressure on American workers. But if you allow immigration to come in and you allow the American economy to grow, that leads to elevating all workers, not just those at the top. The GOP is a party of corporations, not one of the people. They don't believe in the minimum wage, and so they don't believe in workers.
Thank you, Blake. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Inflation. For Shri, we're going to move on.
Inflation.
For Americans, inflation is an issue of the greatest importance in this year's election. According to the latest report of the Labor Department's Consumer Price Index, the annual inflation rate is up to 8.2%. What letter grade would you give the Biden administration for its handling of the economy, and what must be done in order to combat this inflation? Shri, to you.
Well, I think it's clear that he gets an F. The United States finds itself in the midst of an economic crisis that started when the Democrats enacted a prolonged lockdown of our economy, causing over 200,000 small businesses to close while ballooning total billionaire wealth by $1.7 trillion. And to make matters worse, they then went on to print $6 trillion in 2 years and declared war on American energy, halting the new drilling of oil and gas, blocking permits, and sending the price of basically everything skyrocketing. And what's the Democratic solution to this? The Secretary of Energy thinks we should all just buy electric cars. Stacey Abrams thinks you should just kill your baby. And Joe Biden doesn't think at all. Republicans will rein in fiscal spending, such as the $350 billion slush fund for large electric vehicle companies, small business relief that discriminates against white people, and 87,000 IRS agents, and will reverse Biden's energy initiatives.
Thank you, Shri. Now, Blake, to you for your minute.
I'd give Biden a B. I think it's fair to say that inflation is a challenge for Americans, but it's not the result of Democratic policies. Every other country in the world is experiencing inflation, especially at higher levels than the United States. But Democratic policies, contrary to what the Republicans will say, have actually improved our efforts to combat inflation. The American Rescue Plan included an enhanced child tax credit for poor and working class families that the GOP wants to repeal and replace with tax cuts for the rich. The Inflation Reduction Act will lower health care costs and energy prices while raising Social Security payments. The GOP wants to cut those payments. Republicans want to repeal those policies and institute worse things for American workers and middle-class families and give more tax cuts to the wealthy. That's not how you combat inflation. That's not how you handle the economy. We learned that when they did their own tax plan back when they controlled the House. And look what that's done. Middle-class families ended up paying more, and that's what partially led to Democrats taking back the House in 2018 and the White House in 2020. And we aim to keep it that way.
Thank you, Blake.
Can I please touch on that?
Yeah, you have 30 seconds.
Yes, okay. Well, 2012 called and they wanted their economic talking points back because I don't support cutting Social Security. I don't support cutting Medicare and Medicaid. And that is a lie that is pushed by the Democratic Party. And their policies absolutely did cause inflation because they caused the supply chain crisis when they locked down our economy for 2 years. The Republican Party was in opposition to that. He cites other nations, but the United States has a higher inflation rate than Germany, the United Kingdom, Italy, Canada, and France. So actually, inflation is an American problem, and they've done nothing but make it worse.
Can I get a rebuttal?
15 seconds, Blake. You can have 15.
He may not believe in cutting Social Security, but his party sure does. He doesn't even know what they stand for. Look at the House GOP's stance on the commitment to America. They made it explicitly clear that they want to cut Medicaid and Social Security. They don't know their own policies. Trust the Democrats. We've been doing great with the economy. They don't even know what they want to do.
Okay, you have 15. You were called out specifically. I'll let you go for 15.
Yeah, I mean, we had control of the United States government for 4 years, and we didn't cut Social Security and Medicare. Again, 2012, the Romney Republicans are gone. The McCain Republicans are gone. This party does not support cutting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. I think you're stuck in the past here.
Okay. We have started off strong, as you can tell, with the economy. Economy is one of the most important issues in this election. Don't forget that you're watching this on Notre Dame television, and you can catch tonight's full broadcast after we are over on our YouTube page. And of course, don't forget to submit your questions throughout the night. We really want you to send those in, scan the QR code, and give us the questions that you want to hear from these candidates. As the debate continues, our staff is working diligently to field those questions to find the best ones that we can read at the end of the night. So find a QR code down in midfield comments and scan so we can do that. I want to turn now to energy and the environment. In America today, 80% of our energy comes from fossil fuels. The consensus among climate scientists is that continued carbon emissions will cause irreversible harm to our climate and environment. So, Blake, this question goes to you first. Should the United States shift its energy policy to focus on cleaner energy sources? And if so, what role should the government play in that shift? 60 seconds to Blake.
Climate change is an existential threat, and America's response will determine whether humanity survives this crisis. The only effective approach is a government-led shift to renewable sources in the U.S. coordinated with the rest of the world. We can look to current Democratic policies as a model for incentivizing this shift while helping the economy. The Inflation Reduction Act provided historic tax credits and other incentives for companies to seek out renewable energy and enhance their energy efficiency. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act updated the nation's power grid, improved public transit by investing in zero-emission vehicles, installed electric vehicle charging networks, and more to combat climate change. The Republicans will say either that climate change isn't real or that it'll hurt the economy. Both points lack grounding in science and facts. We can look to our European allies to see that the transition to renewable energy actually helps your economy, especially when you listen to the scientists.
Thank you, Blake. Shri, we'll go to you. 60 seconds uninterrupted. What role should the government play, if any, in the shift to cleaner energy sources?
Well, again, with all due respect, I think you came prepared for the wrong debate tonight, because I do think climate change is an issue. The idea that climate change will somehow end the world is empirically baseless. Democrats like to say after every natural disaster that it's because of the Republican inability to combat climate change, but the reality is that natural disaster debts are at an all-time low. Debts because of heat-related causes are half of what they were in the 60s. We will have plenty of time to adapt to climate change. And this is also to say, not to say that we shouldn't do anything from an energy standpoint. Republicans support increased investment in nuclear energy as a source of fuel that can balance environmental needs with a reliable energy source, whereas Democratic administrations have been defunding nuclear energy for years, with the Biden administration shutting down Yucca Mountain, diverting funds towards failed solutions like, again, in the Inflation Reduction Act provides funding for failed solutions like wind and solar that produce intermittent energies and that are causing blackouts in places like California. So Republicans support nuclear energy. You support nuking the economy, and there's a difference between the two.
Thank you, Shri. Thank you, Shri. 30 seconds to Blake.
Here's the issue with that statement. What I would like for the Republicans to do is to go tell the people in Texas that they do care about energy, that they do care about combating climate change. I'm sure that when they were freezing this winter that they would love to hear that answer. But here's the other problem with that. They're not providing any substantive evidence or reasoning as to why we're against things like nuclear energy. But on top of that, they're also not showing and disputing the evidence that we provided that the Inflation Reduction Act is doing what the science and the evidence shows is good for the economy and for the environment.
Let me just touch on that.
15.
Well, I don't understand the point about Texas energy, but I can say that Democrats have been defunding nuclear for years. Biden defunded it. They shut down a nuclear plant in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York. And the reason that we don't think that the Inflation Reduction Act is doing anything for the economy is because it's providing subsidies for things like electric cars, which actually have found, scientists have found, produces a higher carbon footprint than regular cars.
Thank you. Well, we started with energy, and we're going to move now to criminal justice. Thank you both. Our next topic tonight focuses on criminal justice, and we'll talk about the rights based on the Second Amendment and how recent actions by President Biden have affected the debate surrounding the legalization of marijuana. But let's start our talk on criminal justice with this. Since COVID-19, violent crime in America has risen. According to a recent Gallup poll, 78% of Americans believe there is more crime in America than a year ago. Shri, 60 seconds to you. What policies, if any, should be implemented to lower violent crime rates?
Okay. I want to begin this segment by telling you the story of Raymond Wilson. Raymond was a serial burglar, having been arrested at least 12 separate times for the offense. In June of last year, Raymond offended again, but rather than remaining in pretrial detention, he was freed under New York's bail reform. Within hours of his release, he broke into the house of a 12-year-old girl and raped her. The Democratic Party has waged an all-out war on law enforcement on the altar of social justice, and these are the consequences. Their social justice kills. In dozens of Democrat-run cities across the nation, homicides up 50%, assaults 36%, and meanwhile, Democratic prosecutors like Chesa Bowden in San Francisco are abolishing cash bail, refusing to prosecute theft, and defunding the police. The Republican platform is simple. We believe that you deserve to feel safe in your own community. Republicans will increase law enforcement funding, increase sentences, restore cash bail, and protect qualified immunity. Thank you.
60 seconds to you, Blake. What policies, if any, should be implemented to lower violent crime rates?
I want to note that this debate is about the federal Democratic and Republican parties, not the state level. The key to reducing crime is eliminating the conditions that pressure individuals to commit crime in the first place. The failures of our economy and social welfare programs have forced millions of Americans, which are disproportionately people of color, to resort to crime. On top of that, our criminal justice system disproportionately targets people of color, especially African American males, reiterating the structural violence of racism through mass incarceration and police brutality. We have to reimagine our social support system and reinvest in the programs that actually decrease crime, like education and healthcare. A majority of Americans in a survey this year identified easy access to firearms as a driving contributor to high crime rates. Democrats are committed to ensuring dangerous people can't get access to those firearms. That's why we passed the most significant gun safety legislation this summer, but what you'll hear from the Republicans is that guns protect people, despite the fact that we see mass shooting and violent crime right after another.
Thank you, Blake. Yes,
30
you're going to get 30 seconds uninterrupted. There you go.
Well, first of all, I find the suggestion that the reason people are committing crime is because they're poor, I find that suggestion to be grotesque. During the Great Depression, when this country was a lot poorer than it is today, the crime rate is actually very low. So the reason that people are shooting each other in the street isn't because of crime, it's because of culture. It's because of things like fatherlessness. It's because of things growing up in unstable communities, which are all things that their policies have supported. And as for the point that it's about the federal government, well, this election has state, local, and federal elections, and we need to talk about all of them, not just your selective.
Patrick, I'll go to you.
Thank you. So, staying on the issue of crime, I'd like to turn our attention to the criminalization of drugs. Blake, last month, President Biden pardoned thousands of Americans convicted of marijuana possession and ordered the federal government to review its federal marijuana laws. He also urged governors across the country to follow his lead for people convicted on state charges. Should recreational marijuana use be legalized nationwide? Blake, 60 seconds to you.
Recreational marijuana should be legalized nationwide. The war on drugs has disproportionately targeted Black and brown Americans, leaving millions of nonviolent criminals in a cycle of destitution and imprisonment. Black Americans are arrested for cannabis charges at 4 times the rate of white Americans. The prohibition of marijuana is merely another tool to reinforce the racism baked into our system and our institutions, and that must be opposed. Legalization provides significant benefits as well. The Congressional Research Service projected that taxes and regulations on marijuana legalization would yield $6.8 billion annually. In Colorado and Washington, more crimes were solved after legalization because police were either to divert resources to the things that matter, which were violent crimes. Legalization also protects the environment, as regulators can ensure compliance with environmental laws, unlike the hazardous waste of illicit cannabis production. The Democrats stand for progressivism and progressive values and leading to a better America for all, not locking up people who don't deserve it.
Shri, should recreational marijuana use be legalized nationwide?
Before I respond to that question, I want to talk about the criminal justice system because he brought it back in the last segment and he brought it up today. First of all, there's less than 1% of the federal prison population, even before Biden's order, was there because they possessed marijuana. Most of these people are there for violent crimes. And the idea that the criminal justice system is systematically biased against Black people isn't true either. You're actually more likely to be struck by lightning than be an unarmed Black man killed by the police. So this is a lie. No, and to answer the question, no, I do not support the legalization of marijuana for the sole reason that it is an irredeemably harmful drug that will undermine the common good. Unlike alcohol, which research has found to have health benefits when consumed in moderation, marijuana has no demonstrable positive benefits and is linked to brain damage, strokes, and is far likelier to be addicted to and consumed to the point of intoxication. In Colorado, which he mentioned, after the legalization of weed, marijuana-related hospital deaths visits soared, including for children. Finally, marijuana is a gateway drug. We already know what Democrat politicians in places like Oregon have done on the drug addiction, which is allowing people to do heroin in public spaces, and we cannot afford more people addicted on hard drugs.
Thank you, Shri. Yeah, 30 seconds.
Here's the issue with Republicans when it comes to the criminal justice system. They like to spit out these random statistics that have no grounding in the facts when not looking at the actual situation. The fact of the matter is that communities of color are disproportionately targeted by police. They're more monitored by the police, whereas white Americans are often let go when these issues come up. Their communities aren't police. The police let white Americans go when they show up. But when it comes to people of color, they're disproportionately targeted by the police. They're more likely to be arrested, and it leads to this cycle of racism and destitution for the worst off in society.
Another incredibly important issue on the ballot this November is guns. According to the Pew Research Center, gun deaths are at record highs in the United States. This summer, the federal government passed the first major federal gun legislation in over a decade, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. How can the United States reduce the number of gun-related deaths, and to what extent does the recent gun safety legislation help achieve this goal? Shri, 60 seconds to you.
The first thing we can do to stop gun violence is lock up criminals. I mean, the fact is the vast majority of gun-related crimes in this country are committed in our inner cities, and as many as 80% of them are committed with guns that are already possessed illegally, meaning more gun regulation isn't going to solve that problem. We need to get tough on crime, reinstate cash bail, increase sentences, and the presence of law enforcement on our streets. And the second part of this issue is cultural. We have a crisis of meaning in our country, driven by the liberal-led collapse of our core institutions, church, family, community. Psychologists have actually found that the reason so many kids in our inner cities join gangs is because they give them a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging that they never got growing up in a home without a father. I hope the sexual revolution was worth it. I hope destroying our core values on the altar of liberal autonomy was worth it, because the access to guns has been a constant. Why are school shootings spiking now? Why are crimes spiking now? And the answer is that it's a cultural phenomenon that they've created.
Thank you. Blake, over to you.
One thing he didn't talk about was the easy access people have to firearms. Schools, parks, nightclubs, shopping malls, worship centers. These are only a few of the places where gun violence is now normalized. 40,000 people die annually from gun violence, with a 12% increase in suicides and 70% increase in homicides since 2011. We have to reduce gun violence in this country, and we can only do that while respecting the rights of responsible gun owners. The right to bear arms, though, shouldn't be extended to those who will use that right to harm other Americans. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was the most significant gun safety legislation in decades, indicative of a highly productive Democratic Congress. $750 million to ensure those who pose a danger to themselves or others can't get access to firearms. $250 million to support community initiatives and mental health. On top of that, it passed a number of initiatives to crack down on gun purchase loopholes. They're going to try to make this a culture debate, but all that's going to be is dog whistles for attacking people that they don't want to see in power or in America.
Thank you, Blake.
Can I respond to that?
30 seconds. Go.
His dodge on the culture question. Do you not think fatherlessness is a problem? Because I think it's a problem, and I think that you dodging it is quite indicative of where you stand on that issue. But anyways, easy access to guns is not the problem here, because as I said before, 80%, as many as 80% of gun crimes in this country are committed with guns that are already obtained illegally. So these are people who are already bypassing the gun laws that you've passed. So how is that going to fix the problem?
Thank you, Shri. Thank you, Shri. 10 seconds, Blake.
Here's the problem with their culture debate. They're not looking at the facts. All of the recent mass shooters got their guns legally. That's what the problem is. Easy access to firearms.
Thank you. All right. A break. We are going to take a quick break and give our candidates time for a breath. Give all of you time to submit more questions. We want to see them rolling in. Keep them coming. We want to find the best ones that you have, so we will be back in a few moments.
What's up, Irish? I'm Ashlyn Poppy, Director of Operations for BridgeND and a member here at NDTV. Tonight, we are taking a brief intermission from this exciting debate. I want to take a moment to thank all of the awesome debaters, the moderators, and all of the people working hard behind the scenes to make this event possible. I also wanted to remind you to submit questions throughout the duration of the debate using the QR code located in the midfield commons. This will also be projected on the big screen momentarily. Remember, this is an important opportunity to engage in open and constructive political discourse about some of the most pressing topics facing our nation during this midterm season. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we continue with tonight's midterm debate. And thank you so much for being here, and be sure to leave some questions using the QR code.
Welcome back to the 2022 midterm debate, sponsored by Notre Dame Television and BridgeND. You can find all of this on YouTube at Notre Dame Television right after, but don't forget, be submitting those questions. They're rolling in. We're starting to see them, and we'll pick some of the best ones to ask our candidates at the end of the night. It's been a great first half, so let's continue, and I want to continue now with America's families. In this section, we'll talk about healthcare and education policy, but I want to start with the issue of abortion. This summer, the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization overturned the federal right to an abortion. Blake, this question starts with you. 60 seconds uninterrupted. Should women have a federal right to an abortion, and what restrictions, if any, should the government impose on abortion? Blake, to you.
I want to note that we're two men talking about a decision that we'll never have to make, so I consulted women in CDEMS for this question, and it's funny how you started laughing. I proudly affirm a woman's right to choose. The right to terminate a pregnancy is enshrined in a woman's personal liberties derived from the 14th Amendment, similar to choices on relationships, marriage, contraception, education, and more that have never been challenged by Republicans. For nearly 50 years, our nation's laws recognize this fundamental right, with 3 conservative justices currently sitting on the court attesting to that under oath. Dobbs will impose significant burdens on women's health care. We've already seen Republicans force rape victims, women with life-threatening health conditions, and teenage girls to carry their pregnancy to term. That's the result of their culture war rhetoric. The social and economic ramifications of the anti-choice movement will disproportionately impact communities of color, rural areas, and low-income women. The ruling in Dobbs must be overturned, and we must return back to the fetal viability standard of Roe and Casey.
Thank you, Blake. Shri, 60 seconds uninterrupted.
Yeah, let me be as clear as I can be. Abortion is murder, and accepting cases to save the mother's life should be illegal nationwide. Abortion is the violent dismemberment, poisoning, or stabbing of an innocent, genetically distinct human being that by his nature is entitled to the same protections we all receive. Now, the pro-abortion side might respond to this by saying that women have bodily autonomy, but actually parents are not autonomous at all with respect to their children. We all agree that parents must provide a basic level of care to their for their born children, and there's no reason this shouldn't apply to the unborn as well. For generations, and you've seen this today, the pro-abortion side has sold a lie to young women that the path to their success runs over the bodies of their dead kids, presenting motherhood as some kind of disease to be neutralized rather than as a blessing to be embraced. It's the reason why so many women are now abandoned by men after having kids. It's the reason why corporations are now cutting maternity leave and paying for women to kill their children and come back and be a good cubicle worker in the office. Republicans will build a culture of life. You've given us a cult of death.
Thank you, Shri. Thank you, Shri. 30 seconds to Blake goes to you.
Here's the issue with their rhetoric. They're positioning abortion as this thing that women get all the time, but they don't recognize the tragic decision that it is. And it is a serious issue, but it's not like women are getting abortions day in and day out. It is a life-threatening decision that affects a woman's life significantly. But what I want to hear the Republicans do is to tell that teenage girl in Texas that even though she was raped by her uncle at 12 years old, she still has to carry that baby to term because it'll provide meaning to her life, rather than simply the fact that it'll end it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
15 seconds. Yes.
Again, another straw man, because I don't think that 12-year-old girl should have to carry the baby to term because it would present a threat to the life of the mother. We've said that we support that kind of exception. But I want to respond to the other claims that he makes during this debate. First, he says that Roe v. Wade should stand because it was federal law for 50 years. Well, you know what else was federal law for 50 years? Plessy versus Ferguson. Just because it was precedent doesn't make it good.
Thank you. 10 seconds to you.
Again, I want to hear him talk about what the Republicans stand for, not himself. Republicans are the ones who have instituted laws to force rape victims to carry pregnancies to term.
Blake, thank you. You were called out. I'll let you 10 seconds.
Again, now he's changing the issue. Before it was a 12-year-old child, now it's a rape victim. No, I don't believe you should discriminate against a child because of the circumstances in which they were conceived. Does he think that human life has value in the womb? I'd love to hear him answer that question.
Thank you, Shri.
Can I get he directly called me?
We're going to move on. We've gone back and forth for quite a bit. I want to follow up, though, with the idea. We're gonna continue on abortion, but I want to ask another question. Would you support legislation from the United States Congress to act on abortion, whether it's creating federal minimums or a federal ban? Do you believe the decision should remain at the states, or do you believe that Congress should pass a bill? I'll go to Shri first for 60 seconds.
Yes, as I stated in my opening statement on this issue, I believe that the abortion must be illegal on a federal level because this is not a state issue. The abortion is something, we have women right now who are crossing state lines to get abortions and are being subsidized in doing it. Crossing a state line is not something that's very difficult. You can go 30 minutes in some places, 2 hours you can be in Illinois and kill your baby. And you can be paid by states such as California to do it. So no, this is not a state issue. This is actually an issue of the Interstate Commerce Clause that supports a federal ban on abortion. But again, I want to go back to what Blake said. He never clarified whether or not he thinks human life in the womb has value. You never clarified whether you think it's a human being, and you never clarified whether you actually believe that parents have some responsibility to their children. Do you believe that, or do you think that women are totally autonomous and should not have to take care of their kids? Would you support abolishing child neglect laws as an example of that?
Thank you, Shri. Blake, you'll have 60 seconds. The question originally was, do you believe it should be in the states or be a federal law?
Here's what I want to point out. A few months ago, the Republican argument was that abortion is a state issue. And now you're hearing the Republicans say, actually, it's a federal issue, and we're going to impose our worldview on the rest of the country, even those who disagree with us. That's indicative of what Republicans stand for, forcing their own views, implicated by their own perceptions, by their own religions, by their own beliefs on other people, instead of allowing others to pursue their individual life plan and pursue liberty. But on the question of abortion, exactly what I said in the last question, it's about reinstating the standard under Roe and Casey. We need to overturn Dobbs, and we need to go back to the precedent of abortion. But let's go to the human life question. The rhetoric coming from the Republicans is inherently baked into religion. It's inherently baked into people's previous life values that shouldn't come into policymaking. Policymaking is about pragmatism. It's about adhering to everyone's interests. It's not about imposing your own personal or religious views on others. I'm Jewish. I shouldn't have to listen to Christianity to tell me when life begins.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. 30 seconds to you, Shri. 30 seconds.
First of all, I have not invoked religion once during this debate. He's the one who just brought religion into this debate. You don't need to be religious to understand the fact that human life begins at conception and that we should not be killing innocent human beings. And just because his religion, I don't know about Judaism, just because his religion supports abortion doesn't mean abortion should be legal. The Aztecs support child sacrifice. Should we allow that? You cannot play these morally relativist games with people's lives. And in addition to that, he again never clarified whether he thinks parents have a responsibility to their children. I'd love to hear an answer on that.
Thank you.
I get a rebuttal.
15 to Blake.
Yeah, he literally just equated Judaism to Aztec child sacrifices. That's what you get with the Republican Party. And I just want to point out how demonstrably offensive that is. But let's go deeper into this about the Republican policies. Again, they're trying to impose their own worldviews. The science is not clear on when life begins.
You've had 15, yes.
Yes. First of all, I'm not saying I'm making any kind of claim about Judaism. I'm saying that anyone can make any kind of claim, and we just can't allow that claim to be. We cannot just allow deference on that claim based on the fact that it is one. Some people believe in slavery. Do we allow slavery? No, we don't. So this moral relativism is idiotic.
Gone back and forth. This is obviously an important topic, but we are going to continue talking about America's families. An important topic to America's families is education of their children. Recently published 2022 data shows that ACT test scores dropped to their lowest in 30 years. Shri, this question starts with you. How can we increase educational outcomes for students in the United States and reverse these trends?
Thank you. I think any discussion of education in this country needs to begin with the reality that the Democratic Party shut down schools for 2 years over a virus that posed less of a threat to kids than the flu. And that's what's contributing to this historic drop in test scores. But I would go against my conscience if I didn't talk about the fact that the arguably worse than this is that Democrats across the country are intent on sexually indoctrinating children in public schools, teaching little boys they're actually girls or that gender is a choice. You have not just declared war on our Christian values. This is not just a war on parental rights. This is a war on reality itself, and the casualties are the children. The casualties are the thousands of female athletes who are having their hopes and their dreams ripped away from them because of your denial of biology. It's the little girls who are having to share their private spaces with naked penises. It's the thousands of children who are now being chemically castrated and generally mutilated with irreversible effects on their health and their fertility. I mean, how do you defend that? Do you? And can you tell us what a woman is, please?
Thank you, Shri. 60 seconds will go to Blake.
Again, let's talk about the Republican rhetoric. Again and again, what you've heard the Republican debater bring up is this culture war rhetoric. But what I want to hear is what Republican solution is to that. Is it about overturning gay rights, just like how every Republican in the House voted against codifying gay marriage this summer? Is it about taking away fundamental rights for LGBTQ plus people? And fact of the matter is that all the scenarios that we're talking about are straw mans. They're disproportionate. They're not actually occurring in our school system. What we should be talking about is what the Biden administration has done. The American Rescue Plan invested hundreds of millions of dollars to safely reopen our schools and to institute measures to make up for the learning loss that occurred during the pandemic under President Trump's watch. On top of that, the Biden administration has released funds to support early childhood education. The Republicans will try to make education a debate about the culture war. However, the debate should really be about how we best provide for America's children, not about imposing the Christian values he literally just mentioned.
Thank you. Yes, you have 30 seconds.
First of all, he didn't answer the question. He can't tell you what a woman is. And second of all, we're not, the idea that Republicans are making the culture war an issue is a fundamental lie when you're the ones who brought drag queens into our schools. You're the ones who are lying to kids about genders. You're the ones who are trying to chemically castrate and generally mutilate children. And don't tell me it's not happening. I'm from New Jersey. My governor passed a law that literally said that people in elementary school have to be taught about this stuff. I stood at a school board meeting as they presented pornography, lies about gender to kids. So, I mean, I didn't make culture war an issue. You made it an issue.
Yes.
Thank you, Shri.
15 seconds will go to Blake.
Again, throughout this debate, I didn't bring up the culture war. I didn't try to instigate hateful rhetoric. I'm not the one up here being openly transphobic and homophobic. I'm not the one talking about saying that children are being castrated. That is inherently offensive. It's bigoted, and it's indicative of the danger that the Republicans pose to the country.
Another crucial issue for families all over the country is access to health care. Blake, this question's for you. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, about 26 million people in America remain uninsured. What should the government do, if anything, to address this issue?
The argument behind school choice is persuasive. Some schools underperform, so we should allow other students to attend better schools. The problem, though, is that the reality is more complex. There simply aren't enough spots in schools receiving vouchers, allowing some students to benefit while leaving the other students behind to suffer in underperforming schools. The result is that those underperforming schools are expected to do better with less funding rather than being granted the support necessary to improve educational outcomes. Moreover, studies have found that school choice programs saw no improvement in learning outcomes, and the better choice is to fund our underperforming schools more. We also shouldn't forget the racist origins of school choice and how it leads to de facto segregation. White parents in the 1970s used magnet schools to maintain dominant white population in schools. Any expansion of school choice risks us returning to the days of segregation in schools.
Shri, over to you for a minute.
Well, I mean, the principal reason to enact school choice is because the fact that they've absolutely destroyed our public school system, whether it was shutting it down for a year, whether it is, again, lying to kids about genders, which he failed to defend. He basically said that he didn't bring up the culture war during this debate. Well, obviously you don't want to talk about the fact that you're giving drugs like Lupron to kids, which are used to chemically castrate sex criminals. I would understand why you wouldn't want to bring that up, but that's an issue that's happening in our schools. And yes, ideally we'd like to retake control of the public public school system and make it about learning reading and writing and math again. But until we can do that, we need to create vouchers for private schools, for other institutions that teach the truth and that can help improve educational outcomes. It's interesting that he thinks that school choice is somehow racist, but African Americans are among the demographics that are doing the worst and under our public school system, even as they receive the most money from the federal government. So what's actually racist here? Preserving the status quo.
Shri, yep, 30 seconds to you, Blake.
Here's what I want to point out. He keeps bringing up schools closing during the pandemic. Schools closed under President Trump because he was also the president that we saw COVID begin under. But let's talk about the broader question of school choice and education. He's going to continue bringing up this offensive, transphobic, bigoted rhetoric about how education is harming our nation's citizens. The problem with that, though, is he's simply reading headlines from Fox News, not stuff that's actually happening. He's bringing out straw man arguments and not actually looking at what's happening in public schools across the country.
Thank you, Blake. Shri, you'd like a rebuttal? 15 seconds.
It's very evident that my opponent doesn't want to talk about what his party is doing to kids in public schools. He just prefers to deflect off the issue and think that parents who have legitimate concerns about their child potentially being indoctrinated into a false ideology are somehow just reading Fox News headlines.
All right, now we're going to pivot to some of your audience questions. The first question comes from Junior Zachary. With the Supreme Court threatening to greatly change affirmative action this court term, do you believe affirmative action still has a place in our college admissions process? Shri, the question goes to you.
Yeah, hot take on this one. I think white and Asian kids are just as valuable as black kids. And I don't think we should be discriminating based on against anyone on the basis of race. My opponent and his party, or specifically his party, have waged a war on white people. In Section 1005 of the American Rescue Plan, they actually include farm and ranch relief that can't go to white communities. They actually pass small business relief laws that can't go to white people. I mean, why, well, in public schools, as we were just talking about, they're teaching critical race theory, they're teaching that white people are oppressors. So, I mean, this is a party that is focused on this very discriminatory racist dogma against white Americans. And affirmative action is just a byproduct of that. It's a byproduct of their force, this forced idea of equity based on the pigmentation of your skin rather than on the content of your character. And I just completely reject that. I just fundamentally reject it.
Thank you, Shri. Blake, over to you for your minute.
There it is. We got to the term critical race theory. What I would love to see is any evidence at all at how a complex legal theory is actually being taught in third grade classrooms, which it's not because it's a legal theory. But let's go to the question of affirmative action. And here's where Republicans get the mischaracterization of it. Affirmative action is about reifying and rectifying the harms brought to marginalized communities throughout the United States in its history. Let's look at what Justice Jackson said this week during the opening arguments about this recent Supreme Court case. She said that under what Republicans want to do is that people can use their legacy status. White students can use the fact that they've been fifth-generation students at a particular institution, whereas black students can't talk about how they couldn't attend that institution for generations because of slavery. Affirmative action is necessary to rectify those historical injustices and ensure that everyone can get the education they deserve and to reach socioeconomic success. They don't want to engage on the question of rectifying historical injustice because they know they
Thank you, Blake. Would you like 30 seconds, Shri?
I think we should definitely give preference to kids who are poor, who are underdeserved, and we can do that while having race-blind admissions process. I mean, why should Barack Obama's kids have some kind of advantage over a poor white kid from the state of West Virginia, over a poor Asian kid who lives in San Francisco? I mean, it makes absolutely no sense, and it shows the fact that they're just obsessed with race. They're obsessed. They claim, for all how much anti-racist they claim to be, they are obsessed with the color of your skin. They fundamentally cannot look past it. I support policies that help underdeserved people, not just people of a certain skin color.
15 seconds. Blake.
Republicans would love for you to just forget the fact that racism exists. But here's the fact of the matter. Racism does exist, and ignoring it won't make it go away. It will actually make it worse. And it's not about that we simply prefer people over race in affirmative action. That's also a mischaracterization.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to Zachary who gave us that question. I want to go now to Lucy's question. She is a senior. What is one thing you think that the other party has done well for the American people during the past 2 years? Blake, we will start with you. 60 seconds.
I think we can talk about a lot of what Republicans have done to help Democrats. We had the Bipartisan Gun Safety Reform Act. We've had multiple instances of bipartisan legislation. But here's the issue. The Republicans don't want to claim credit for that. They don't want to talk about how they've contributed to progress in America. And we can see that in the condemning of Liz Cheney and removing her from the party. What we see from Republicans, especially in college Republicans, because they never condemned January 6th, is a refusal to condemn attacks on our democracy. And we see simply the toleration of the fact that individuals in the Republican Party want us to overthrow democratic institutions when things don't go their way.
Shri, we'll go to you for 60 seconds.
Well, I was actually going to use this segment to talk about maybe something the Democrats have done good. But I'm going to follow your lead and say that the best thing the Democrats have done for America these last 2 years is make sure that we're going to have a Republican majority for the next 10. Because the things that the Democratic Party have done are absolutely abhorrent. They have, again, he doesn't want to discuss it, they have destroyed public education, teaching kids that they can be whatever gender they want. They have redefined womanhood into complete incoherence. They are chemically castrating children. Thank you.
I would actually like Blake to answer the question. What is one thing that you think, I would like you both to actually answer the question. What is one thing you think the other party has done well for the American people during the past 2 years?
I think I did answer the question at the beginning. We had Republicans join us on things like the Bipartisan Gun Safety Reform Act. We also have Republicans who are standing up for democracy and truth, like Liz Cheney. Those are the Republicans that I'm proud of. Those are the Republicans that I'm proud to work with. Well, who I'm not proud to work with are those Republicans who refuse to stand for democracy.
All right, Shri, I'll give you, you wanted to, I'll give you the opportunity
I'll
to answer the question.
First of all, Liz Cheney's not Republican. Let's get that very clear. But second of all, I want to answer the question. I think the one thing the Democrats did right is actually in their Inflation Reduction Act bill, they had a price cap on insulin for seniors on Medicaid over the age of 65. I think that's a good policy. I think certain prices of drugs, such as insulin, are far more expensive here than they are in other countries, and I don't think that should be the case. So I support that one initiative that they did on the insulin price cap, and, you know, a broken clock is right today, and that's an example.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, audience, for those questions. Those were great. We're glad you submitted them. But as we close tonight, this debate of ideas is in precedence of the 2022 midterm elections. Elections have looked quite different throughout our country's history, as we've expanded the right to vote with constitutional amendments and voted in new ways. As we approach the 58th midterm election in America since 1790, let's close this debate by talking about democracy. According to an NPR survey conducted earlier this year, 64% of Americans believe that U.S. democracy is in crisis and at risk of failing. How can we strengthen our democracy and ensure that it is vibrant for decades to come? Shri, you have 60 seconds uninterrupted.
Thank you. Well, let's be clear. The biggest threat to democracy today is the Democratic establishment. Let me again be clear. The results of the 2020 presidential election are constitutionally invalid. Democratic Secretary of States in several swing states illegally changed voting laws to abrogate signature verification for mail-in ballots and install insecure drop boxes that blatantly violated the elector's cause of the Constitution, which stipulates that state legislatures have sole jurisdiction over election laws. The FBI colluded with Facebook and other big tech sites to censor damaging information about Joe Biden in the run-up to the election. In fact, the Democrats use the FBI and other institutions to go after their political opponents all the time, not only raiding the home of Biden's likely 2024 opponent, but calling school board parents terrorists and performing an Osama bin Laden-style raid on the house of a pro-life activist. Look, the Republican platform is clear. You should show an ID to vote. Mail-in ballots should be near.
Thank you.
I have 6 seconds. We should have an election day, not an election month. These are common sense reforms that will protect our elections.
I want to give Blake the opportunity to answer the question, but we're going to come back to what you said. So Blake, answer the question, 60 seconds, and then we'll come back.
Well, you heard it at the start of the Republicans' response that the representative from College Republicans thinks the 2020 election is invalid. That's evidence that MAGA Republicans have no interest in preserving democracy. The RNC called January 6th legitimate political discourse while ousting those who sought justice against insurrectionists from the party. GOP candidates across the country espouse election denial and conspiracy theories that manifest into anti-Semitism and physical violence. Our democracy cannot survive if the other side won't even accept basic truths. The GOP must end its toleration of anti-democratic norms. But let's get to the question. The key to strengthening our democracy is restoring faith in our institutions. Democrats have lived up to that vision. The Freedom to Vote Act in Congress right now will expand voter registration, ensure election security, prohibit foreign finance of campaigns, and more. The Disclose Act will require individuals and organizations to disclose their donors when they donate politically. The Biden administration also convened the first task force to recommend policies to combat disinformation. That's how you protect democracy.
Thank you, Blake. Shri, I'm going to go to you, but I want to also add something to this conversation. According to a Pew Research Center survey, nearly 8 in 10 voters who back Republican congressional candidates say they are very or somewhat confident that votes cast in person will be counted accurately, whereas fewer than 4 in 10 voters who back GOP candidates are somewhat confident in the accuracy. What do you say to that?
Well, maybe perhaps we shouldn't pass policies that count votes inaccurately. For example, abrogating unilaterally, illegally, Democratic Secretary of States saying that we don't have to verify signatures for absentee ballots. I live in New Jersey, as I've said before. I was sent mail-in ballots during the 2020 election. You know whose mail-in ballot I got? I got one from the person who lived before me who hasn't lived here in 10 years. So theoretically, under that law, I could have voted, I could have signed the ballot with a forged signature, I could have sent it back, and that vote would have counted. So maybe if we didn't do things like that, Republicans and everyone would have confidence in our election. But I also want to rebut what he says. He says that we think January 6th was legitimate political discourse. I don't think January 6th was legitimate political discourse. I think January 6th was Joe Biden's version of the Reichstag fire. Because you know what Joe Biden did? There were actually FBI informants in the crowd that stormed the Capitol. The Capitol Police that day let people in, and that's what happened. They got their spectacle, and now they're using it to go after their political opponents, like raiding President Trump.
All right, Blake, I'll give you 30 seconds to respond. How do you see fit?
Just one response to that last part. Joe Biden wasn't president before January 6th, so he couldn't have gotten the FBI to do anything. But let's get to the question about election security. Just like how I talked about in my previous answer, the Biden administration as Congress has passed multiple laws to ensure election security. But let's get to the question of mail-in ballots, which the Republicans love to talk about. The fact of the matter is that there are only a small number of cases in the wide history of America where voter fraud has actually occurred, especially under mail ballots. All they're talking about is fear-mongering to undermine trust in democracy.
I'll get you 10.
Well, first of all, if you don't actually verify the signatures, you're never going to find evidence of fraud. That's kind of how that works. And as for the reforms they're passing, he never clarified whether or not he thinks Democratic Secretary of States violated the Electors Clause, which they did.
Thank you. We are going to go now to 2-minute uninterrupted closing statements. Blake, we will start with you. 2 minutes uninterrupted.
At the start of this evening, I asked you to consider which party was best fit to run this country. After hearing from both sides, the answer is clearly the Democratic Party. What you've heard from Republicans are non-substantive talking points with no tangible policies and fear-mongering rhetoric to inspire harm. And the policies they do have don't work, but you didn't hear any policies during this debate. The last time they controlled Congress, they passed one piece of legislation that was significant in 2 years and left us in crisis. Democrats, however, have passed some of the most significant legislation in decades in 2 years alone. Expanding our majority will only ensure this monumental progress continues. For the Republicans watching, here's my message to you. Today's Republican Party is not the party of Lincoln. It is not even the party of your parents. The modern GOP is one of resentment, fear-mongering, and exploitation that culminates in physical attacks on our elected officials and democratic institutions. A party that deems it appropriate to spend government money to investigate and to inspect a teenage girl's genitals is not interested in the values of small government, fiscal responsibility, and small individualism that likely drew you to the GOP initially. Party. I implore you to use your vote to send a message to the GOP by rejecting the anti-democratic illness plaguing your party. The fight over the soul of America will not end on Tuesday, but this midterm election has a pivotal role in the stakes of American democracy and whether we will continue for future elections. Election denialism cannot win. Hatred cannot win. Authoritarianism cannot win. What must win is democracy, equality, and freedom. A vote for the Democratic Party is a vote for hope, change, and continuation of progress over the last 2 years. A vote for Republicans is trailing back to the days of harm for all Americans except for the elite and corporations.
Thank you, Blake, and thank you very much for your contribution throughout tonight's debate. Shri, we'll go to you for your 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Thank you. During this debate, you have heard two visions for what our country could look like. On one hand, there's a liberal vision: open borders in the name of multiculturalism, lawlessness in the name of equity, warmongering in the name of democracy, destruction in the name of liberation. The Democratic Party has waged war on everything good and holy, and the result has been a society that is more atomized, more self-destructive, and weaker than ever before. On the other hand, there is the restorationist vision. Blake's right about one thing. This isn't your father's Republican Party anymore. This isn't George Bush's party anymore. This isn't Liz Cheney's party anymore. This is not a party of small government anymore. Because there's not even a conservative party anymore because there's nothing left to conserve. And the era of conservative docility is over. We are going to build an America where you can once again afford to raise a family on a single income. We are going to use the power of the state to restore the natural limits and the standards that once sustained a healthy and moral order, and rebuild the institutions that once filled us with meaning and purpose. We are going to defend our culture and put Americans first in the name of God, family, and country. And we are going to make America great again. Thank you.
Well done. Well done, both of you tonight. Thank you very much for participating in tonight's debate. We also want to say thank you to our sponsors, BridgeND, NDTV, Student Government, and NDVotes, along with College Democrats and College Republicans. Lastly, we want to say thank you to our viewers for watching and participating. We hope that you were able to learn more about the perspectives of your fellow students here tonight, and that you were inspired to consider your own philosophies in light of what you heard here today. That is what we, BridgeND, are all about. We invite you to join us and learn more about how others are feeling about the world's pressing ideals.
Well, yes, thank you so much. Thank you to Bridge, and from all of us here at Notre Dame Television, we want to thank you for joining us tonight. Don't forget that you can catch this broadcast at Notre Dame Television's YouTube channel and go behind the scenes at Notre Dame Television on Instagram. I want to give a big thank you to Kieran Cantwell, JJ Post, Jake Miller, Jacob Irons, Megan O'Keefe, Ashlyn Poppy, all the board of NDTV who put this together. They rocked it. And as of tonight, 621 votes have been early cast already. Election day is November 8th on Tuesday, so don't forget to vote. From all of us here, good evening, good night, and go Irish.
Go Irish.